What's up? Welcome back to my channel. I'm ConjuredJasper. I just want to get into the stories today, but there's only 6 more days of Halloween, and this is my first video of October of 8 back-to-back videos, and so that's exciting. Happy Halloween. Follow my subreddit, r/ConjuredJasper, and follow all my social media. Let's read these stories. This user wants to be kept anonymous. My dad and sister had the same imaginary friend. When my baby sister was 3 or so, she suddenly developed an imaginary friend. I was a tween at the time, so I was honestly quite glad she had something to distract her other than me, considering I was her built-in babysitter 24/7, and like all cusp of puberty kids, would much prefer watching TV than constantly entertaining a toddler. So naturally, I always encouraged her to play with said friend, and she would do so all hours of the day, giggling away in the living room, as I supervised in peace. My parents, too, were a little shocked as to how taken my sister had suddenly become with her friend, but my mom would just chat away with her friends as to how funny it was. Both she and I had never had imaginary friends, so we both thought it was interesting. My dad, however, was more quiet on the subject, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. After about a month or so, we're all in the living room and my sister is playing and my mom is on the phone with my grandmother, and she suddenly calls over, "What's your friend's name, baby?" And my sister replies, "Kevy." My dad immediately shoots up from his seat and he has the weirdest look on his face. He goes to my sister and asks her to say their name again, and after she does, my dad looks straight sick. My dad is a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and isn't afraid of showing his emotions, but never before had I seen such a look of raw horror on his face. Even now, 10 years later, I've never seen him so scared before. My dad runs to the back of the apartment and I follow out of curiosity, but he just calls for my mom and they shut me out of the room. Eventually, later that day or the next, my dad tells me a story. He had an imaginary friend when he was little named Kevy, and considering he was the youngest kid in the family by more than 10 years, Kevy was his best friend. He had this imaginary friend for over 5 years or so, and my dad told me that at first Kevy was normal, but as time went on, he got meaner and meaner and eventually escalated into telling my dad terrible things and that he should do terrible things. This scared the hell out of my dad, and one day he told Kevy to go away, and he just did. My dad had never told his family about the bad things Kevy had said, and they all assumed he naturally grew out of it and never mentioned he had an imaginary friend to anyone, including my mother and I. He also didn't tell me exactly what Kevy had said to him either, and I didn't push. He really looked terrified. The next week or so, my family saged the house repeatedly, went to churches, and left cleansing tablets in all entrances to the apartment. We told my sister Kevy wasn't allowed to stay anymore, and while she was upset at first, eventually she stopped mentioning him, and we never talked about it again. It has been a decade since then, and only recently has this memory come back to me after I've reconnected with my dad, and we were reminiscing about our first time in that apartment. I didn't mention this event to him, though. My family is very superstitious, and so we completely dropped it, save for continuously saging every couple of months. Kevy is not even the real name of my dad and sister's imaginary friend. I didn't feel comfortable typing it out. This has been a long buried memory, and honestly, even typing out the story feels wrong. I do not trust kids' imaginary friends ever. So, next story. This story comes from user residentsafe771. My parents went hiking 3 days ago. The search party found their GoPro still recording. This one is a no sleep one, I'm pretty sure, and if it's not, I just won't keep this part in. It was sudden. We got a call from a nearby city's police station. Our uncle, who was taking care of me and my sister while our parents were away, answered the phone. We were confused as to why our uncle was crying until we learned the news. Our parents were found dead over 11 miles away from where they started hiking over 3 days ago. I was horrified. I felt as if my world had just splintered into nothing, and my sister just fell to the floor while I just sat there, blank face and warm tears running down my cheeks. The sheriff was obligated to ask us where we wanted the funeral and other questions. Thankfully, my uncle pulled himself together and scheduled his own brother and sister-in-law's funeral by himself. The weeks flew by as the weekend was over, and I was left in a well of grief, still processing all that had recently happened. Eventually, we got another call telling us that another piece of evidence had been found. We initially dismissed it until they told us that it belonged to our parents. As they told us, the more intrigued we were, until my uncle decided to drive us all down there. After all of us at least wanted to see their faces one more time, since mysteriously the funeral was closed casket. Once we got there, we waited in the waiting room until the man guided us in. They said they had not yet reviewed the footage, and that when they found it, it was covered in blood and still recording, even though it was clearly damaged. Finally, we got to a room where they were ready to play the footage, and all of us took a seat before the man who let us in started the video. At first, it was just my parents walking. We fast-forwarded, more walking, some fishing, picking up sticks, and skipping rocks. I was simply happy to see my parents again, even if it was just a recording. We went to the next video. My parents were just walking, but looked noticeably tired and anxious. Eventually, while they were resting, my mother broke the silence. "Did you hear any of that last night?" my father responded. "Yeah, it sounded so odd, like it was directly in my ear, but also near a mile away." She gave him an agreeing nod. Eventually, they kept walking, not breaking the silence, until they camped. "Do you think it will happen again?" my mother asked. My father responded, "It had to have been just some animal. No creature would follow us that far just to make some noises and not do anything to us." "But what if it—" My mother was cut off. "Just trust me. We'll leave tomorrow and forget any of this happened," my father tried to reassure her. It worked, and they went to bed. On the third day, though, something was off. My mother no longer had her bright energy accompanying her. My father seemed to be suffering from sleep deprivation. It felt as though my parents were just husks of their former selves, and more ominous than that, there was a strange, faint background noise constantly playing for the first 3 hours. Then it just stopped. My parents looked around and seemed to sigh and become way more relaxed. Then they stopped for a food break at a small creek. It seemed good until that noise started back up, and louder than before. This caused notable dread in my parents, as the fear in their eyes was visible. They both ran away, leaving all their food behind, as the noise kept getting louder. Eventually, my mother tripped, and her bone-chilling screams could be heard in the background as the noise seemed to stop with her. After 2 hours of non-stop running, my father ended up at our house backyard. I heard him sobbing uncontrollably. He was a mess just by the audio. He started to get it together and approach our house until the light around him seemed to wash away like fresh paint in reaction to water. We sat there watching this overwhelming silence and darkness until it was broken by a faint sound. Then it got louder and louder until it felt like my eardrums were about to pop. My father appeared back in the woods, but he was not alone. As he turned, a part of the screen seemed to warp and glitch out. My father looked at it and started screaming as the thing approached him in the blink of an eye. My father seemed to be screaming as something was inserted into his mouth. Then it stopped when the snapping of his bones was heard. The GoPro fell onto the ground, and it filmed my father floating over the glitching part of the screen. Then both of them just seemed to phase out of focus and into nothingness. I was in shock by what I saw, and so was everyone else in the room with me. My sister was pale, and my uncle looked completely petrified. Finally, the police escorted us out. The drive home was silent, and we all seemed to not dare to speak a word, because in the silence we all heard it, the faint sound of the thing that killed my parents slowly approaching. This user wants to be kept anonymous. I've had a shadow person follow me most of my life. As far back as I can recall, there has always been a presence in and around myself and members of my family. As a child, my parents dismissed the things I'd see and feel as me having an overreactive imagination. There were things I would relay, feelings that overwhelmed me, and some of these beings just existed, no malice or good, just around. My mom was the most adamant about it being my mom was the most adamant about it being nothing, so much so I stopped talking about or telling them what these beings were feeling or doing. The house I spent most of my life in was where I met the dark man who would watch me and my sister. He wasn't scary, but just curious. It turned out the landlord's husband had died in the house, but my sister and I weren't told this till we were adults. Now the shadow person or thing has been with me for a very long time. It was very different from the dark man. It has always followed me. And as a kid, I assumed it was just a figment of my imagination. So I wasn't very alarmed. It was just another being around. This one wasn't as kind, though. It clung to me and would scratch at me, fill me with terror, and emit so much dark energy. I didn't tell my parents, though. I did try to reach out to others, but I was told I was ridiculous or crazy, so I kept it to myself. I didn't tell another soul till I was 17, and that person saw firsthand what I had been hiding for a long time. Writing it out feels wrong. I'm an adult now and its presence is still felt, but it doesn't reach out as much. We have an understanding, so to speak. My boyfriend, though, unfortunately taunted it after I told him about the thing that follows. That made things worse for a little while. He had horrible nightmares and became fearful, eventually made amends with the shadow. That shadow people are just so, scary to me. And that's awful. I'm so tired. I'm recording this so late, but I have had to record forever. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm really excited for this because I might be in way over my head with filming 8 back-to-back videos, but I think they're gonna be awesome, and I'm gonna put a lot of effort into them. And it's for Halloween, so peace out. No. Stay spooky, guys. Subscribe, like, and comment, and share with anyone you know.